Welcome to the Good News Bay podcast, where we are making Bay County brighter one conversation at a time. Today, our guest is Bob Majka. He is the Bay County manager and serves in a role where he really is looking at a 30,000 foot view of all the ways that the municipalities work together and our county works together. You have had your job cut out for you the last couple of years, 5 years, a little while. Couple things about you before we begin, just background. You're married to Jennifer. You have two grown children, both who have served in the Navy. Your son that is now, he finished his term with the Navy and is working as an electrician and a contractor. And then you've got a daughter that is active duty in the Navy.
Right.
And so that is awesome. You have a background in firefighting, not just that you have been a firefighter, which is significant in itself, but you've also got some training in it, in the hazmat stuff, hazardous materials. At some point, it looks like, just looking through the timeline, that turned into some management. You took on an assistant role as an assistant manager here in Bay County, then moved down to Cocoa Beach as a manager. And I'll tell you that I remember, and you probably don't remember this, but I remember being in the room. I think it was your first meeting, and I didn't know you. Like, I moved away from Bay County and came back in 2007, and I didn't have any idea what any of that meant, but I knew everybody was excited that Bob Majka came back. They felt like we did something really special when you came back to town. And so maybe that's good to know, right?
Yeah, certainly. I remember distinctly we were talking about water rates that first meeting. That was not a very happy subject. So, but I was glad to be home.
I probably left after I prayed, to be honest, in that one.
It was probably the safest time to go.
I invocate a lot and then leave. But So a couple. I want people to know some personal things about you. You like exercising, so at least to the fact you like Spartan races.
Yeah, my wife and I, a couple of years back, were actually invited by a friend of ours to kind of participate in a local group. It's a Team Evolve, and we really have embraced that as an kind of a different approach to staying healthy, and so good fellowship with those folks and community service, but really it all culminates with getting ready to run in these obstacle course races.
Right, you run a long ways, you get real dirty in the process.
Right,
you have to go over.
It's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Fun. Yeah.
Do you crawl under barbed wire on those things?
Yeah, there's a lot. It just depends on what type of race it is, but it really is about the fellowship. It's about the folks we train with.
Well, it's impressive to me because the Spartan race is what it sounds like. It's hard, and so people that are listening or watching and don't know, it's a mark of strength and toughness. I want to say manliness because your bride did it, but you got to be tough to do that. You also like to shoot a little bit.
I do. My younger days, I really had my heart set on becoming a Marine. And so through my ROTC experience, I had access to a couple of things, one of which was, I think, probably what I consider the greatest leadership training that an individual could get. And I happened to have some mentors that were excellent marksmen, and I learned how to shoot. And I've enjoyed that. And so whether it's long guns, handgun or shotgun, I did shoot some skeet competitively for a number of years, but right. I really do enjoy that.
Well, I'm going to ask you that. I know that you moved to Bay County because your dad was stationed at Tyndall, right?
Right.
Was he in the Air Force?
He was. He was in the Air Force. He came out here to work at the Engineering Services Lab.
Right.
And then when he was reassigned out to Alamogordo in southern New Mexico,
right.
I had been to that base before, had graduated high school by that point in time, and made a decision to stay here in Bay County and go to school, go to Gulf Coast, and
right.
Start my higher education.
Speaking of Bay County and speaking of high school, you're mostly grad. I want to point that out.
Class 88.
There you go. Go Fins. They're not to brag too much on Mosley, but I think at this time they're 9-0, 8-0? 8-0. Yeah. And so all Bay County should be proud. Absolutely. For Bay County School doing well.
Absolutely.
Well, let's dig into Bay County a little bit.
Sure.
I won't go into all the details of what a Bay County manager does, but basically as I'm looking through the list of all that it means, you're over just about everything. And or at least get some oversight and are accountable to the commission for it.
Sure.
The county commissioners serve different districts, but ultimately you serve in a role that is a position that kind of has to do the bidding of what the county has asked. And you came in a little bit before the hurricane, right? It's 2000, was it 15?
2015, I came back. Yeah.
And so you had a little bit of time to prepare, kind of not knowing what was coming. And I could talk forever about how I see God's provision in the different people that were placed in a variety of different roles. Not to say anything about those that had served in roles before, but we've all watched here locally between the hurricane and the pandemic at the toll that it's taken and the energy level that's required. Mm-hmm. And while neither of us are particularly young men, right. we also, I have observed that there is a group that went before us that it would have been much tougher, I think, for them to serve in some of the same roles. And so I'm grateful that I consider you to be one of those people that God brought to play. Man, I could go into a bunch of technical stuff, but you have things that this group has not maybe heard. I know that you did a big 2-year update after the storm.
Right.
I watched most of a video that you did with, I think it was the Rotary Club,
right.
As an update, some fascinating stuff with that. There was much worry about how much debt we had after the storm.
Right.
We had a really big loan. Do you remember how big that loan is? I got to know.
So I think the first thing I want to say is I'm blessed to be part of a really good team, really great team. That includes my peers at the municipalities. Each of them are either city managers or city clerks, and it's a privilege and an honor every day to be able to work with those individuals. We were talking earlier. We have a formal monthly meeting where we get together at breakfast once a month, but whether it's Mark McQueen or Vicki Gaynor at Lynn Haven, or even, Doug Baber, the new manager out of Mexico Beach. I mean, we all talk regularly. We pick each other's brains. There's no one right way to do anything. And so there's access to that. But we have over 700 employees at the county. And, I am proud to be a member of that team. And that's exactly what I am. I'm a member of that team. I know that at the end of the day, certainly the buck stops with me. I'm the chief executive for the county. I'm ultimately accountable to the county commission and the public for, what the county does day in and day out. But, we couldn't do it without those folks. And, a lot of them, 400 of them lost their homes during the storm. A number of my employees actually lost family members. Those people came to work every day to serve their neighbors. They continue to do that. They've done that through the pandemic. So, I think it's all about, we each know what our role is. And as you said, part of my role is to kind of keep my pulse on, my fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the community, and kind of take the information we get from the public, information we get from the county commission, and help try to form that vision and then go execute on it. So, one of the things that we were faced with immediately after the storm was, we knew that we were going to have to come up with an exceedingly large amount of float. The way that disaster recovery works is you have to spend the money first, and then FEMA reimburses you on the backside. And so I know the public hears a lot about how, this municipality or that municipality or the county is getting a grant or receiving funds. Right. And a lot of times that money is a reimbursement for dollars that were already spent. So we get a lot of inquiries about, why aren't you using that money, let's say maybe for a park in this part of the community, or why aren't you spending that money on, this project in another part of the community? And oftentimes a majority of that money is actually coming back on the backside. We went out, you can imagine having to go and sit down with your creditors, so to speak, and say to them, I'm going to need $500 million. That's $500 million that we anticipated we were going to need. And I will tell you, I wholeheartedly expected to get laughed out of the room. And, because of the county's good financial standing, because of the good faith and efforts and track record of the county in the past, didn't bat an eye. The only question that we had to really answer was how we were going to structure that. That's, of course, a significant amount of money. Ultimately, we borrowed just south of $400,000.
Can I ask you how much is, and I don't know the answer, how much is $500 million?
Right.
Compared to, say, an annual budget for the county? So
our annual budget right now, the budget we just adopted, is just a little north of $400 million. So you can imagine 100+%, right?
Yep.
And so, you just don't have that. We spent our roughly 30 million in reserve. Probably, I had that obligated probably within the first 3 hours after landfall. We knew that was going to be significant enough, and that money was obligated and out the door. We were having conversations as soon as we could with our financial advisors, talking to them about what we could do, when and how, and structure it. And
So was this even? I'm assuming you were in the emergency operations center is at that point, right?
Certainly, right.
So this would have been within the confines of that space that
But
y'all were taking.
before the end of day one. So as people were still experiencing, the event, losing their houses, losing their businesses, being injured, losing family members. Those are the kinds of conversations. And we knew at that point that we were going to be hammered. It was not a question about whether we were going to come out of this battered.
So these things always go different directions. But like, I remember, because I wrote it out, we didn't have cell phone service for days. The sheriff's department, most of them were 90% of Bay County was Verizon, right? So if you happen to have an AT&T phone, you could get service.
Right.
Y'all were truly handicapped to even be able to communicate.
Right. You always have
blows my mind.
You always have a plan B, right? So,
well,
we have plan B. I think we got to like plan E on this. I distinctly remember one of our communications personnel who we tend to really, they tend to get lost in this whole conversation about first responders. But
yes,
really, truly, if you want to know where all this begins, if you need help in our community, is when these men and women answer that phone call for help. And I distinctly remember one of our dispatchers walking down the hallway, and she was on the cell phone. Nobody else had a cell phone that worked. And I remember looking at her and saying, "Who is your service with?" And she told me AT&T, and I was like, "I need that phone right now." And she got off the phone. I believe she was on the phone with her sister. She got off the phone, and we operated off of that one cell phone. Yep. I want to say for the first maybe 36, 48 hours until we could get, cell phones in that would function. But
well, I interrupted you. Day
sure.
one, you guys were on trying to get the funding in place. You had three.
Right. We knew we couldn't wait. And we had pre-competed contracts in place. So our contracts for things like debris removal and providing food, water, and ice. So those things we have in place as a community. Pre-event, because we know as a coastal community that's subject to the threat of hurricanes, we need to be ready to go. And the more that we can control locally here, and the more we can take care of ourselves, and the less we have to rely on the state or the federal agencies, which they are great partners, but that creates time and delay. And so we knew we were going to be able to get our contracts executed and underway, but as soon as you start executing, you start receiving invoices. And so we knew, for example, getting the debris off the roads, getting the roads open, we had to have that fundamentally at the beginning for life safety purposes. But then that's also a method to show the public progress, right? So you can imagine in your neighborhood, you start out the day after the storm and you can't hardly get down the road. And then maybe a couple days later, the debris is stacked up on the sides of the road. And then maybe a couple days later, that debris is gone. The public uses that as a litmus to kind of gauge progress. The restoration of utilities. I remember, so for planning purposes, for example, we plan to be without power for 4 weeks based on every category of hurricane. So at the time, we're operating off the belief that it's a Category 4. So we were planning to be without power in this community for 16 weeks. The Gulf Power rep came in on the floor of the EOC, and I remember one of the first updates was almost 100% of their infrastructure was destroyed and not functioning, right? So I'm thinking, man, we're going to be in this for a full 16 weeks. They came back a couple of days later. We had a very brief impromptu meeting. The Gulf Power rep came to me and said, "Listen, we're required to have an inspection before we can restore power to a structure, and we need to know how we're going to deal with that. Our building inspectors are tied up at that point in time doing damage assessment. They're not out there going house to house and inspecting restoration to service." And I remember Sandy Sims was the rep at that time, and I remember looking at her and I was saying, "Look, your linemen know when a house or a structure can take power safely, and when it can't, we're going to trust you. Hook the power up. We'll worry about the inspection process later," which is what we're able to do. They had power back on in 28 days to 100% of the structures that could receive power safely. It's amazing. It's a phenomenal job that those people did. And it's really just about putting the trust in them and their personnel to really do their job. Their folks, those linemen and women, they do that job every day. And so it's part of just stepping back, and we got the policy really for the inspections really to protect the homeowner and protect the consumer. But when you can stay in your home and you can have power and you can keep your family there, it allows you to focus on other things like getting your family fed. How are they going to? Where are you going to get water from? That one thing in life is then taken care of. So we really did try to lean forward and start, getting as much red tape out of the way as possible, and getting things back, or letting those who could get things back do their job so that people could stay home.
When you're speaking, I have to tell you, there's a part of me that says, "Don't ever doubt America, like the American worker, and don't doubt Bay County."
Yeah,
when you can get the red tape out of the way, and because literally at the very beginning you were talking about being the leader. Your job, our job, my job, is to equip and empower the people whose responsibility it is to get after it, and then get out of the way and let them do it.
Right. We had
that's what happened.
We could talk a lot.
I know we could.
But I mean, I'm really proud of this community. I mean, it's you hear other people talk about how it's resilient, but it is. I mean, I've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to be in other communities post disaster. As at one point in time, I did some wildland firefighting, so I've been to other parts of the country and been into communities that have been devastated by wildfire. Mm-hmm. And I've seen other communities just roll over and just give up. And Bay County did not do that. It's not part of our DNA. I can't tell you how much time and how much resources were saved by. We would have engine companies that would be going into neighborhoods to be able to. We'd have somebody call. We'd get a message, let's say from the Red Cross, go do a welfare check on my old elderly, mother or father. I can't get a hold of them. This is where they live. And we would send an engine company in there to maybe start some search and rescue. We'd get on that street. We'd get to a point where we couldn't go any further. Residents would come out and say, "Hey, what do you hear? What do you need to do?" We'd be like, "Hey, we're trying to get a check on, so-and-so Smith down here at this address." And the number of times that residents said to our folks, "Let us take care of that, come back and check on us in a little bit." That engine company may have been tied up for 4 hours, maybe on that one incident, but because the neighbors came out and said, "Let us handle that, we'll get back with you," we could redeploy that asset somewhere else and really go help somebody that may have needed it. And really the community just came together. We went to, I remember the night of the storm, we were able to get from 79 and 388 to 77 and 388. Somebody had gone along that road on their own and cut trees right after the storm. We don't know who that individual is, but they opened that road up to one lane. Just that.
It's true in you, and it's true in me. I love our people. I love my hometown, and I love the sunsets. Don't get me wrong, and I love the beaches. But what you're describing is what I love most. And what's really neat is even after the pandemic, we're more resilient because of the storm. Have handled the pandemic better because of it. But the people that are moving here from other places, they're moving here because we are who we are.
Right.
And when they get here, what they're telling me is they love who we are, which is great. Let me ask you this. We got this huge debt that came in on the front end.
Right.
Staggering amounts of money, partly because of all this debris. How many times does it fill the Cowboy Stadium?
Oh man, I can't remember. It's just
like 5 or 6 times.
We had a lot of those analogies, here to the moon, and
we'll link a couple of these other things that you've had to talk about because you get all these crazy amounts of things, like 15 years worth of debris.
Right.
When all that's said and done, we knew that we're getting way behind the curve, and it was hard to get resources initially. We won't recount all the days it took to get federal help and all this stuff. They told us it would take, 15 years to get
on
that
average,
paid back?
It takes a community about 15 years. If you look at New Orleans after Katrina, you look at the Northeast after Sandy, on average, it runs a community about 15 years to fully recover. We decided early on that we were not going to play by that schedule. We set a goal to try to be fully recovered in 5 years. So when it comes to the debt, like I said, we borrowed just a little north of $400 million. We've got $150 million of that paid back. We anticipated having all of that, excluding the interest portion and the local match portion, which we can talk a little bit more about here in a moment. All of that paid back by the fall of 2023. We're currently a full 12 months ahead of that schedule. So we're hoping to have all of the federal funds back and as much of that debt paid off that's not really the local share of that by the fall of next year. And so, we're we're well on our way of doing that. All of our FEMA projects that we've submitted have been obligated. There's a couple we're going to go back and probably challenge with FEMA, just because we have to. It's the responsible thing to do. We have some disagreements on how insurance allocations have been done, but really the goal there is to try to get as much of that paid for through the public assistance funds and through the insurance proceeds.
Yep.
And then the balance of that is up to the state. The state will share in 12.5% of that. We may or may not be responsible for 12.5%. And then when it comes to the interest that we're bearing, that's a conversation we're having with Congressman Dunn right now and Senator Rubio and Senator Scott. FEMA has the option to cover, the federal law allows them to cover interest as a reimbursement. For this event, they have chosen not to. And so we are working diligently with our federal partners to get some legislation passed that will retroactively make FEMA do that, so we can get that burden off of our back.
That would sure
our
be
federal
nice if they do
partners
that on our
have
behalf.
agreed to pay 100% of some of the costs, so that certainly is great. But again, if we had $1 million project and we incurred $100,000 worth of interest, it's really great to get that to get that $1 million covered. But that $100,000 in interest is still, would still be hanging out there, and you stack that on top of, $600 million, $700 million worth of total expenditures. So we're trying to avoid passing that burden on to the taxpayer.
That's what I was going to say. You're the county manager saying we're trying to make it so that the county, the viewer, the listener doesn't have to pay more.
Right. And the county took some action at our board meeting on Tuesday of this week. We went back to our creditors and said, hey, look, we've been paying interest only for the last 3 years. This year we were supposed to begin paying principal. We went back to them, restructured those debt instruments. Certainly in light of interest rates being more in our favor, our creditors were more than willing to do that. So we're able to obtain a better interest rate, plus we're able to extend that interest only time frame so that we can get more of that principal paid by our federal and state partners and get that reduced.
Word has it that whenever we, as a county, when we do projects, that you've got a unique and good skill, like a refined skill, if there are federal and state dollars available to help come alongside and maybe multiply the Bay County taxpayers' dollars. You're pretty good at making sure we get more bang for our buck. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and again, I think so oftentimes when communities go to state and federal agencies for assistance, they usually go with an empty hand, and a lot of these funding sources are competitive. And so what we've learned is that if we go to our partners with a portion with skin in the game, so let's say if we have for example, we're going to be talking to the commission at our next meeting about I think it's a $1.6 million road resurfacing program, some more local roads that are going to get paved.
Right.
Normally we would bear all that ourselves, but because we have the ability to put $600,000 worth of surtax money in there, the state and federal partners are going to come up with the other. With the balance, the $1 million plus that's left.
Yep.
And so in that situation, if we didn't have that money and we were going after those funds, we may be competing with other communities that are maybe putting money in the pot, makes us less competitive. So having access, the voters giving us access to those surtax funds by approving that surtax back in 2016, we can then leverage that. And so our share, we generate about $22 million in surtax.
When you say surtax, you're talking about the half cent.
This is the half cent infrastructure surtax that the voters approved.
Okay.
And so there's roughly $22 million of that collected a year in Bay County. The county typically gets between $12 and $13 million of that.
Right.
We, the first year, leveraged $17 million additional dollars from our state and federal partners to put with that $12 million. So we were able to fund basically $29 million worth of projects when the principal generated by that tax is countywide is 22.
Right.
And but that is shared. The 22 million is shared based on population with all of the municipalities.
Right.
And then we also look for opportunities to partner. So if there's a project that's beneficial to both, let's say, municipality and the county, we look for ways to work together to leverage those dollars to make the dollar go farther and really serve everybody, regardless of what jurisdiction you live in.
Well, one of the things I think is really neat, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, talking about, and it was something I wasn't aware of before this week. I think it's amazing that the municipalities are getting together and that you're getting together with them, because as you guys meet, you should, whether it's roads or stormwater or utilities or emergency operations, all these things are, I mean, there's connected objectives, and
Right.
you'd like to think, and it sounds like to me that it's one of the things we've made some progress in as far as how these folks get together and align objectives. I also kind of, because as we were talking before, you mentioned that that concept started really with the Bay County Chamber years back.
Yeah. Carol Roberts, the executive director in the chamber, they've been having a city county manager breakfast for as long as I've been with Bay County, and so that's a formalized meeting. We get together once a month. We each talk about maybe challenges that are going on in our jurisdiction. And there's always an opportunity for us to have conversation in those meetings about how we can work together. But we talk with each other regularly.
On the half-cent sales tax, I was doing a little. I went to the site. There's a website, and I think we can put the link in the show notes. But on that, there's a lot of information about different projects and where all the different things that those dollars go to. I know even on some of the roads locally that I've driven down. And I think Jinx might have been one of those. Jinx is a
surtax project. It has a sign out there that says, and those signs also talk about what jurisdiction is funding the project. So the signs are similar, but we'll put the jurisdictional name on there.
And in listening to some of the interviews and questions people have asked you, we all had these big trucks going up down the road, and roads that were in rough condition got in the worst condition. Jinx was one of those. It already needed some help, but after the storm, it got a lot worse. And so is that an example where we are able to make infrastructure better, maybe even in part because of dollars that do dollars that we're getting from storm damage and that kind of thing, is that we're seeing federal and state and
in some cases it's accelerating the timeline on these projects. So projects that we maybe weren't going to get to for another 5 to 7 years, we're able to do sooner now because we can tie, let's say, the damage that was done to roads because of the debris hauling. We can tie that component into the project, draw some state and federal dollars down to help with that. It lessens the burden on the local dollars that have to go in. And then because of the availability and, we're taking federal and state dollars, we're typically on a 36-month window from the time we sign a funding agreement with Tallahassee until the time we have to have the project completed. So, if we had a project maybe we weren't going to get to for 7 years, and now all of a sudden there's money and we've got 3 years to do it, we're certainly going to take advantage of that. And I'm glad you mentioned that surtax website. That is a good source of information. That site shows what's going on in every jurisdiction, talks about upcoming projects that are going on right now, and projects that are being completed. The purpose of that site is, that the surtax is only in place in 10-year cycles. And so we're going to be coming back to the voters in 2024 and asking them to renew that tax and extend it another 10 years. And when we do that, we've got to have a report card. And so that website, that GIS webpage is going to be the jumping off point for us to, show the public that their money has been expended. So we encourage people to go there.
Well, look at that. I want to be careful because I'm the Good News Bay guy, right? And I know taxes in general are controversial. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that when I ask people, and I try to ask business guys regularly, like, what do you want me to be asking the folks that I'm bringing on? Like, what would be helpful for you to know? Every single guy I've asked says, ask them about infrastructure. Ask them how we're going to keep up with infrastructure. I may be kind of setting you up in a good way, maybe even as we can't pay for the growth in infrastructure if we don't have a mechanism. And when I went on the site and looked at it, several of the intersections that are really congested, like an example would be at 231 and East Avenue and Baldwin all come together. Any of us that have waded through that traffic, it's backed up. Well, that's one of the projects. And there's probably, and all the intersections, I'm from here. I know all these intersections. Now, there's not a timeline on there, and I don't know if that just depends on when the dollars become available. But my point is, those that are asking the question of how are we as a county going to keep up with the infrastructure, we know that this sales tax is something that tourists pay as well as locals. But we have one of your commissioners, Griff, told me that in his interview that there's 17. We're on slate to have 17 million visitors this year to Bay County, and so they're helping to cover that cost, right?
They do. Every dollar they spend, as well as the dollars we spend, if it's eligible for that tax, it's collected.
I also want to throw out there, because I we are known for low taxes. I think low taxes matter. That's what, I mean, fiscally, that's what all of us really want.
Right.
At the same time, we also know if you don't have the dollars to do some of these things, you can't do them. And we all want the services, but to some degree, you got to be able to sharpen your pencil. And what's crazy to me, and I don't know if I'm advocating for the right thing, I mean, I'm just a preacher, but I think it's amazing to be able, at a time when inflation's doing what it is, because I've looked at a lot of this stuff, and I'm sitting here looking at the millage rate not going up. Is that right?
It didn't. That's correct.
So we're ahead of schedule. Like we should have taken 15. We shot for 5 years on the debt. We're looking at 4. The millage rate isn't going up. Inflation, the cost of workers, everything across the board is just going through the roof. And yet it appears that we have a handle locally on finances. That's a really big deal. And I'm just going to say I'm impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
so the secret sauce in that is growth.
So these new people matter.
So new people coming to our community matter. One of the key ingredients of that is the amount of growth that we've experienced as a community since the storm.
People need to hear
I think
that.
The fact that our governor made a decision to have Florida kept open during the pandemic, and people.
I wondered if that was going to come up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a reality.
You're saying economically it matters. If we continue to do business.
Economically, it has benefited us because the growth has created new revenue.
Yeah,
and we haven't expanded government programs. We haven't increased the size of government.
Yeah.
We've used that new revenue to deal with those inflationary pressures,
right.
to deal with the cost of goods. Just like contractors are experiencing phenomenal increases in unit pricing in their materials, so are we. What we used to pay a year ago for a cubic yard of asphalt, we can't get it for that anymore. What we used to pay,
That's right.
for other materials, we're experiencing the same,
Yep.
the same pressure. So, our first, attempt is always look at what we're doing. Do we need to reprioritize, or the things that can wait? We've rejected a couple of projects this past year because the pricing was so high that, quite frankly, are the projects important? Of course, they wouldn't be in our budget if they're not. But we had to sit down and think, do we really need to do this now? Or, do we think realistically there might be a contraction in the economy in the future where pricing might rebound and we might be able to get it, at this pricing or a little bit cheaper if we maybe wait a year or two?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a gamble because nobody has a crystal ball. But because we have other projects that are higher priority, that the cost is also going up on those projects,
Right.
we reprioritize, and maybe we put a project off a little bit longer, and we fund that higher priority project. And the reason we're able to do that is because we're in control of that destiny ourselves as a community. And that's really the solution to, how are we going to deal with these needs? And the more decision making that can happen here at home that we can make as a community, whether it's individually or whether it's through our elected officials at the city council or the county commission level,
Yeah.
the quicker things will happen, or I would dare say the more sound the decisions will be. So the analogy I kind of use is it's like a gas pedal on the car, right? We're in control of the foot. We can push the gas pedal or we can push the brake, and we're in control of that. The more agencies, programs, individuals that we have between us and that gas pedal or that brake, the more control we lose, and then all of a sudden we're not driving the car. So the key is making sure we're driving the car. We're determining where the car is going to go, and the way we're able to do that is through tools that we have access to, like the local half-cent infrastructure surtax. That money's generated here. The county commission and the city commissions have direct control over those funds, and they can decide whether to expend them or to sit on them based on what's going on economically in the community.
I may be muddying the waters. Do those dollars contribute to big projects like the 6-laning of 390?
They do not. So
Okay.
those are state projects. So
Okay.
that is another initiative that we're hoping to launch by the first of next calendar year, is something similar to the surtax webpage, where our goal is to have a conglomeration of all transportation projects, whether they're federal, state, or local, at one location, so that whether it's elected officials or the public can go to that site. So, for example, if you want to know what's going on with 390, FDOT does a really good job of having project websites. But if you don't know that,
Right.
you may not know where to go look for that information. So what we're hoping to do is kind of bring all this together onto one, what we call a story map, and highlight that visually. And then if you go to that map and you see a segment highlighted, let's say the 390 segment, you click on that. The goal is that maybe it takes you to that DOT project webpage, and then you can click through that and get all the information you want on the 390 project, or the Transportation Planning Organization's 5-year plan, which is where all the next 5-year transportation infrastructure projects are located that are going to get funding. Have a link to that so the public can go in and look at, not just what's going on today,
Right.
but what's the community planning on doing, let's say 5 years from now. Likewise, the DOT has a 50-year plan. Let's link the public to that so you can go out and see, hey, what is the conversation about, the flyovers at 77 and 231 and at East Avenue and Star Avenue. And because a lot of times what we hear is there's not any planning going on, there isn't anything being done. The reality is there is a lot. The shortcoming is that, when you talk about 50 years in DOT's universe, that's a very, very short window. Think about the Hathaway Bridge project. We were talking about that project when I came to work for the county in 93. We just completed that flyover section in front of Gulf Coast State College within the last 12 months. And they're getting ready to begin the next phase of flyover on the beach side.
Right.
The 6th laning of Back Beach Road.
Yep.
That has been forthcoming. It was delayed a little bit because of a downturn in revenue as a result of COVID. The governor took the initiative to put that back. That process is back. That project is now back on schedule, and so it's going to be happening. Philip Griffiths Senior Parkway, the 3rd phase of that's in design.
Right.
There's the Gulf to Bay Parkway, which is in design. There's a number of really significant projects out there, but if you're an average everyday citizen here in the community, you may not know where to go get that. So we're gonna create that platform.
So as a guy sitting looking at the big picture that does know much of this information, when you're looking at the infrastructure needs and you're looking at the growth as well, obviously it's a challenge to keep up with it. From your perspective, are we going to be able to keep up with the growth?
Well, I would say from my perspective, we're already behind. And so the question will be, can we stop from getting further and further behind? And again, the more in control of that we are at the local level, the more influence we can have. But again, we've got some great leadership in Tallahassee.
Yeah.
Representative Trimble and Senator Gaynor have worked really, really hard to bring money home here to Bay County. We execute on those dollars when we get them. So it's incumbent upon us when they get funding in the DOT budget, or they get funding in some other funding mechanism, that we actually deliver when they bring it home.
Isn't it also true that, like, from a business perspective, we talk about being conservative, and the same ones that want low taxes,
right?
They want to keep up with infrastructure. You always, there's a balance, because if you build roads that you don't need yet with money you don't have yet, well, now you gotta either overtax to get it. But as we're talking about the other side of it, we need enough people here to actually get the funding to do the project, and so it's kind of a balance.
Right,
always,
it is,
right?
it is, and it's also about making sure that those of us who are here today aren't bearing 100% of that burden,
right?
For resources that are going to be used at some time in the future by people who either aren't here yet or who haven't even been born, right? So, that's why the funding mechanisms need to be structured in such a way so that those of us that are here today are not bearing 100% of that. We can diffuse that over, let's say, the life cycle of a piece of infrastructure, whether it's 50 years, 80 years, so on and so forth.
So in my last podcast, I interviewed Chuck Perdue, and he gets information about development because he sees all the plats, and he gave me an exact number of folks at the time, a couple weeks back, that had moved to Bay County. And these aren't folks pouring in through the southern border. These are folks that are legitimate driver's license carrying folks that are going to his office to get their driver's license renewed from another state. 6,590, which is great news for a community that needs a greater workforce, like every other community,
right?
That are looking for people that are coming here to actually help and to contribute and to be part of the community. But what I think would be interesting, you may know this already, but he knows which order, like which states they're coming from in order. Okay. So everybody's like, all these people are coming from New York. Now, if you're from New York, I'm not knocking you. But a lot of locals have this concern. I mean, I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking.
Right.
They're going to come down here and they're going to make us a lot like.
I think what we hear most often is, don't New York my Florida.
We hear it. We hear it. And I talked to some folks from California, from Texas, that said, don't California or Texas.
Right.
So, but here they are. Georgia. Number one state they're moving from is Georgia. I can attest this is what's happening in our church too. I mean, like, we're getting folks. Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, and then the other three, we love them from there too, but Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oregon, and California. But what I'm finding, and I'm going to say it again, these folks are coming. They come because they like who we are.
Right.
They're coming because they want something different from where they were. It's not just the Sunsets.
Right.
And a lot of them like our governor. And they like the freedom that we have.
They like the way of life, and they like the community, and yeah, and and I see that change operationally. I could tell you, just subject matter wise, it would not be uncommon for me to, let's say, in the course of a year, maybe field 1 or 2 phone calls about recycling. I probably get 1 or 2 phone calls about recycling every day now, because people who are moving from other communities here, that's a service that's provided. And so we get into some very in-depth conversations again about the cost of service and service delivery. And so for example, we're the 7th lowest taxed county in the state of Florida.
Thank you.
We're struggling. We're striving to get lower, but 7 out of 67. There's what is that? 66 other counties that are do the math there.
Yes.
That are that are higher.
Some of them are moving here because it's cheaper.
Well, they're coming. Yeah, absolutely. And the tax structure is different.
Yeah.
And then when we tell people that, out of every dollar we collect, only 22 cents of that dollar comes from property taxes, right? So the other, the other roughly, 78 cents of that dollar comes from a fee.
Yep.
Or, it's something that somebody's paying for a service that they're consuming. So, if you're getting water or sewer from the county, you're paying for it. If you're getting a building permit, you're paying for it. If you're getting, code enforcement services, I mean, there's things that, you're paying for, you're getting, that you're not, paying blindly for it. You're actually getting a service. And so, we want to try to keep that low. We want to try to find those other sources so that everything isn't borne by just those people that own property in the community. They're actually paying, for what they're using. Transportation, a lot of the transportation money pre-infrastructure tax came off of gasoline tax. So
I know servant leadership's a big deal for just you and your team, which it goes back to empowering your team, working together to accomplish a task. It's also why the alignment with all the municipalities works so well, because everybody's working together to get to a common goal. With that, there's a lot of different pieces in play. One of those is relative to local law enforcement, and I know one of the pieces that's under the umbrella at the county level is not just the sheriff's department, but also fire and emergency management of all sorts. And one of the local initiatives did a little homework on you, want to know how y'all work together,
right.
And because everybody, I want these folks that are listening and watching. If they're new, I want them to know they're safe. I want them to know, because I'm a little bit. I'm not objective here, okay? I think Bay County is a safer place than most. I think we're different than much of the rest of the state and even the country. And I'm going to let you help tell us why. Y'all helped form a joint incident management team. Tell me what that is.
So a unified command team or a joint incident management team is where you bring professionals together from multiple disciplines, and you kind of you put your professional responsibilities, if you will, in a box. And so it doesn't matter whether you're a law enforcement officer, whether you're an EMT, paramedic, firefighter, and you come together as a team and you work together collectively to oversee and manage critical incidents. And so this was born out of the active shooter incident that happened a number of years ago over there off of 23rd Street and Beck Avenue. Anytime we have something like that significant happens in the community, there's always an after action, kind of get together report. So we can all talk through what worked, what didn't work, what could we do better, what could we do differently. And so, this is a concept that's been part of the National Incident Management System, for a number of years. And what the sheriff and I did was come together and we took the initiative to formalize it. And our personnel work hand in glove day to day anyway out there on the streets, in the communities. My fire personnel, his law enforcement personnel, our EMS personnel, all their municipal counterparts. Everybody functions very well. A lot of our folks know each other by first name. They know their families. They know their family members. They know what's going on with their children. It's a very close, tight-knit group. And so, one of the things that we didn't have to really get over early on was that whole challenge of ego, right? This is my sandbox. These are my tools. We didn't have to deal with any of that. It doesn't matter, if a deputy rolls up on scene, let's say if it's we've been called to a house fire and there's nothing going on, they can radio back, let the incoming fire units know, hey, nothing's really going on here. We can, downgrade our response, maybe not have have as many assets go to the scene. As few assets as possible can go there and take care of whatever needs to be taken care of, report writing, for the purposes of making sure people can deal with their insurance companies and whatnot. But it's not really, the egos are just not there. Everybody works, trains well.
Yep.
We've got personnel who are on their SWAT team as medics. It just really is kind of that holistic, all-encompassing approach to how we manage events in the community. And it doesn't matter whether it's a large gathering, something like a large music event, or whether it's an active shooter, whether it's a wildfire. This team works and trains together. We bring together assets from different agencies to activate it. Most recently with the event out at Tyndall Air Force Base, that team came together, and it really is just about trying to be efficient and provide the quickest and most efficient service to the public.
Well, I know that the Sheriff's Department and Sheriff Ford have been very complimentary. I actually reached out to them to see what that had been about, and he's very thankful for the relationship that he's got with your team. Let me see if it says he's placed a high priority on making Bay County safe for those that live here. And I wanted the viewers and listeners to hear that and know that. If I'm making connections in my mind, you got a background in the firefighting side of it, so you get that, you understand that. One of the compliments that I think was being paid to the county and the Emergency Operations Center in my interview with Griff Griffiths was all the debriefing and studying that the rest of the state and maybe even the nation's done relative to how we handled what we did. We've debriefed on that. We're sharper on that. Next time there's an event like a Hurricane Michael, we pray there never has been one before, but we're ready and more prepared and more resilient than most. And all of that to me is great news. And I also, I feel like I forgot to mention this at the beginning. In your background, you're more than, firefighter, you've got a master's in business administration. Right. You got a bachelor's in business. Both of those matter in this tax discussion that we're having, because one of my questions as a businessman would be $500 million. That's a lot of money for somebody to manage. You've been trained for this. And so I'm grateful for that. One other little piece, because you're strategic. We had a little conversation. I helped in the start of a little mentoring program called Elevate Bay. And one of the things we had hoped for was to get different agencies within our community because we were trying to get as many mentors as we could.
Right.
And in talking with you one day, you were able to actually communicate to me, like, if we have a kid in the Elevate Bay program, mentoring a child in a school that doesn't have great family support, not going well as a child, there's a whole ton of cost. We care about the child, but there's a ton of cost involved if that child gets involved with law enforcement, drug addiction, counseling, medical treatment, all this stuff.
Right.
And it's the right thing to do to provide the mentor.
Right.
But there's a dollar figure attached to that.
Right.
Like what the county's going to have to pay if we don't handle it up front. And we have found really across the board with the county and several municipalities a willingness to allow employees to go. And an encouragement to be mentors. Mm-hmm. We did have that talk, right?
Yeah, we did. And we talked about how it's not if you're going to pay, it's when you're going to pay and how much, right? So, whether you pay, in time, whether you pay in salary, whether you pay in benefits, mm-hmm. Whether you pay in social programs, whether you pay in the court system, whether you pay through law enforcement, whether you pay through the correction system, whether you pay through healthcare, there's going to be a payment. And so the question is, where do you intervene to make sure that it can be a winning proposition for everybody, the community, the right. child that's involved, their family, right. Future employers, their future children, their future spouses, their future families. And so, we embraced that when that program came on. And we started out with a kind of a pilot project with just the senior department heads and the division managers. And it was voluntary, but we said, look, we really want to support this.
Right.
These are our neighbors. We're part of this community. We live here. And so what we did was we structured a program where we went to the school and we said, you're starting this mentorship program and we're going to make these people available. Please put us in schools. And we allowed our folks to go during the workday while they were on the clock to do this, to participate in this mentoring program. Again, the thought process being there, the little bit of incremental time that we're investing in that county employee's salary for them to spend that 2 or 3 or 4 hours in that school is microscopic compared to what that cost will be downrange if that one child that we may have had that one opportunity to help gets into the court system, gets into the juvenile system. And so it's a trade-off, right? So our thought is spend a little now versus spending a lot later. And if it means that person comes off their assigned county job for 3 or 4 hours a week to go do that mentoring, we look at it as an investment. And again, as you said, it's the right thing to do. But I think if we have to deconstruct it and talk about value and benefit to the community, why are we doing that? Again, it's not if we're going to pay, it's where and when. So
there are a variety of good mentoring programs in Bay County. All of them after the storm and then the pandemic, it's been tough. But I know that recently, I try to keep up with the news and what's going on with students. I know our superintendent has talked about the need for mentors, and I thought it'd be great to just bring that back up. We'll put a link on there for Elevate Bay, and I'm sure the district will be thrilled that we talked about that as well. I don't know, man. I love where we live. I know that you've pointed out many things already that are good news. Is there anything in particular that you would throw out? Because you say, that you're hopeful about, like that we know we're hopeful we'll pay the debt off soon.
Right.
But is there anything that, like, as a citizen, as a man that lives here, that as you look toward the future of Bay County, that just makes you hopeful?
Yeah. Well, I think as we've seen with the storm, just how resilient this community is. We don't know what's around that next corner, what's at the bottom of the next hill, so to speak. But I get up every day knowing that this community can handle it. As you said earlier, we were hit with Michael. We rolled right out of that into the pandemic. I think we've been better prepared as a community. We've responded better as a community because we had that Michael experience in 18, and then we end up with the pandemic experience in 20 going forward. So I think the sun's going to come up every day. This is a great place to live. It's not perfect. We have our challenges. We know that. We don't think that everything is great and grandiose, and we know we've got housing challenges. But the thing is, I think at the end of the day, no matter what that challenge is, what makes me hopeful is I think we have the capacity and the capability as a community to solve the problem. And whether it's through critical thinking and coming up with new ways to do things, different ways to do things, we have people that are whether they're entrepreneurs, whether they're just really creative. There are ways we can come at things. And I think the less we continue to try to tie ourselves to the standard ways of doing business, and the more we look towards, can we do things differently? I think we're creating opportunity. And one of the things that we've got to be able to do in the public sector that I think is a cornerstone of why the private sector is so successful is we have to create an environment where ingenuity and chance risk taking is embraced. Because
you're talking about entrepreneurship.
If you don't,
aren't you a government official? Are you allowed to do that?
Well, I am. I don't know about that, but I do know that if you keep,
I love it.
If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got.
Right.
And so, if we're going to do things differently, we've got to allow our people to think outside of the box. I know that's a cliche, but I think we've got to create an environment where people can take risk, where they can be creative, and they can come up with alternative ways of doing things. Now, we may not always be able, to do that,
right?
But if we're not getting the result that we're expecting to get because there's some arbitrary, red tape or some policy or some practice that's inhibiting us, we need to really take a hard look at that. Sometimes we may not be able to change it. Maybe something that's in legislation, maybe something that we're required to do. That just means we need to go have a conversation with those people who can get that changed. But our goal is to try to find a way to yes, and find a way to yes in a way that is productive for the community, and that we will not have any unforeseen adverse consequences, 5 or 10 years down the road because maybe we didn't look, at something 360 degrees. So I'm encouraged because I've seen what this community has been through. I've seen what this community has done, and I know we're going to continue doing that. And no matter what challenge we face, I think we're going to rise up to it, and we'll handle it. And it may be frustrating. It may take longer time than people want it to take, but we'll get there. And I think collectively as a community we've demonstrated that we've done that time and time again.
Agreed. Agreed. Bob, it's been a treat to have you as our guest today. And this is some great news. It's encouraging news, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you were encouraged by the good news, we would ask you to subscribe through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, as well as YouTube. If you will subscribe, all new content will come your way. You'll get notified of it, and it'll help us to brighten Bay County. Thanks, guys.